Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings to my 400 affiliates across the country and the planet. I'm so glad you're listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show this morning. Our prayers go out to Chris Cuomo, a friend of mine from my CNN days. He is really struggling with this virus, and I'm sure you join me in that. My first guest joins us from Rome. I know he's isolated there, but you never can turn off former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. How are you?
I'm doing well, and luckily we are, isolated for the moment. And Costa's continuing to lead the embassy here at the Vatican. But it looks like the Italians may actually be very close to turning the corner. The number of new cases has been going down for the last week or so, and they're still going. There's still new cases, but it's not nearly as bad as it was a few weeks ago.
I've been worried about Ambassador Gingrich, your wife, and yourself, because you're in the age demo as I am. What have you guys been doing? How have you locked yourselves in? You probably wrote 3 books, right? I mean, that's like Newt's.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, for me it's okay because I'm happily launching my. Actually, it's the first time I've ever done a virtual book launch for my new novel, Shakedown. So I've been doing a lot of TV. I had the unusual experience of doing The View by Skype, which is totally different. And I'm writing.
They can't hit you at least. Yeah.
That's right. No, but it's fun. Like I have a good relationship with Whoopi, despite the difference in our ideology. But I'm doing a new book that's going to come out in June, sort of framing the election this fall. And frankly, it was really rolling. And then, of course, this virus blew up. And so you've had to stop and rethink everything. It's been a fascinating experience.
It's actually a time to rethink. You're a futurist, Newt Gingrich. I know that. A lot of people know that. Yes, you write Shakedown. You write a bunch of great books. You are a commentator. You are the speaker. But you've always looked 50, 100 years out. Admiral Stavridis, first guy, I think, to the bell predicting this. Tom Cotton, first elected official predicting this. How long ago did you worry about pandemics?
Well, I've always worried about pandemics. We used to run war games. When I had the Center for Health Transformation, we put together a very large war game on a biological breakout, looking at that kind of a problem. So I've had a very long experience of thinking about pandemics. And in this case, the Chinese made it dramatically worse. The fact that they wouldn't tell the truth, they wouldn't let people in to see what's going on, they've cost the planet thousands and thousands of lives and trillions of dollars. And it's just astonishing what bad citizens they were in terms of dealing with this.
The United States death toll went over 4,500 overnight, and I'll update people on the latest, although there's a lot of good news because the combined force of American and world science is focused like a laser on this virus, beating it, both testing for it and then eradicating it. And we'll talk about that, but I first want to talk to you about your experience as Speaker during an impeachment. Nancy Pelosi was the Speaker during an impeachment. A question on the table right now is whether or not impeachment impacted pandemic preparation in Article 1 and in Article 2. What say you, Mr. Speaker?
Well, I think it certainly impacted it. You can't, both impacted the Congress because they were off, playing political games, not looking at the world as it was evolving. And it had to take some energy away from the president. I don't care how tough you are or how disciplined you are. But in the long run, that wasn't the problem. I mean, the fact is, as early as, I think, January 6th or 7th, we offered to help the Chinese. And Dr. Birx has been very accurate about this. She said, given the information coming out in early January, we thought this would be about the size of SARS. And none of us had any indication as professionals that this was so big it was going to be a pandemic. And that's because the Chinese wouldn't share the information. Now, what you've seen in the last 3 or 4 weeks is an astonishing mobilization of the American system. I mean, the free enterprise part of it, the companies coming to bear, the new developments, the new testing systems. There are 100 different good things happening, and we will presently drown the virus in the scale of the American response, something no other country in the world could do.
Now, Speaker Gingrich, I have been an advocate for, I'm glad to hear the president is considering the moral equivalent of war bonds, pandemic bonds, because like World War II and World War I, you're a historian, you know about this. The average citizen got to participate. They could buy a $25 bond for $20 and they could be a part of the effort to turn it around and to build public health infrastructure. Do you think we ought to have a similar program right now?
Yeah, I think if they should be able to structure it so it's basically very inexpensive to manage, and it ought to be priced at such a level that every American, including young people, could have a piece of this. It's the Liberty bonds in World War One, again the Victory bonds in World War II.
Exactly.
It did give people. I actually remember as a kid where you would get stamps and put them in this thing, and you could get them for like 50 cents or $1. So when you're in second, third, fourth grade, you're learning the habit of saving. And then when the book filled up, you take it in and you actually get a $25 bond. And it made you feel like you were part of a bigger world and that you had a role to play.
And that you, in this case, would be helping to defeat the virus that is going to move into the third world. I got to ask you as a futurist now, I'm making you change hats quite a lot. We are hit hard in the United States, but when it reaches, I think of the slums of Kenya, I think of the favelas in Brazil, I think of the shattered country of Venezuela, it's going to be a killer.
It is, and I think the president was correct the other day to say, look, as rapidly as we can build up our production, we're going to start sharing it. He's already sharing it with Italy. We're going to share it with other countries. And we ought to have something the equivalent of the Marshall Plan, looking at all of Africa and all of Latin America. And I think they, frankly, ought to take over and rent a number of the cruise liners, which they could get right now at a bargain rate, and turn them into floating hospitals like the two Navy ships. Because all along the African coast, for example, along large parts of Latin America, they're just going to be overwhelmed. I mean, they don't have a public health system that can deal with this. And what's going to happen is we're going to develop better and better therapies very fast. We're going to develop better and better testing very fast. The trick will be produce it in such huge quantities that you can get it out to these countries, and you'll save tens of millions of lives, and you will reestablish America as the philanthropic good neighbor of the world in a way which will be enormously helpful for the next 20 or 30 years.
I agree. Bonds could go to that, too. Let me close by asking you, Mr. Speaker, about your successor, Nancy Pelosi, and leader Mitch McConnell. I believe it's been Mitch McConnell's finest hour and will be remembered as such, negotiating the passage of a 96-0 vote on a $2.2 trillion bill. But Speaker Pelosi has not been, in my view, a constructive force. How do you assess these two most important members of Article 1?
Well, look, I think McConnell, both in getting all the judges through and in getting the enormous aid package through, has been magnificent. He's extraordinary, one of the most important Senate leaders in American history. I think Pelosi's become despicable. I think her comment the other day, comparing President Trump to Nero fiddling while Rome burned, was just utterly, totally irresponsible, dishonest, and countered what Americans need. Americans need to come together to defeat the virus. They don't need to have petty politicians trying to tear the country apart, or for that matter, petty newsmen at these press conferences trying to tear the country apart. We need to figure out how are we going to save American lives, beat the virus, and help the rest of the planet beat the virus. And Nancy Pelosi is an absolute negative figure dragging down the country.
My last question, evaluate the president's performance for us.
Well, my newsletter tomorrow is going to describe the commander-in-chief as entrepreneur, because I think it's totally outside the comprehension of the news media. This is the only pure entrepreneur ever to be president. He is extraordinarily energetic. He is learning at an extraordinary pace. He's a historic figure, and I think that by the time this is over, as he defeats the virus, pivots, and relaunches the economy, people will realize how important it was that we had Donald Trump at this moment in American history.
And a final word, Mr. Speaker, about Shakedown. You have a new book out. People are buying books to read. I didn't know you did fiction. I didn't know you did. I mean, I knew you did historical fiction. I didn't know you did thriller fiction.
Well, yeah. We put together, Pete Early, who used to be a Washington Post writer, and I have done a couple books now. This one is the Iranians and the Russians deciding they're going to try to set off a nuclear weapon in a submarine to create a tidal wave off of Baltimore and Washington, and two American heroes, an FBI agent and a Navy SEAL, who are trying to stop them. If you're tired of worrying about the virus and you're tired of politics, Shakedown is a great way to curl up for an evening and be off on an adventure.
Mr. Speaker, Shakedown on my list. Thank you for joining us. Our best to the ambassadors. Stay healthy. And our hello to the Pope when she sees him. Prayers from America. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll be right back, America. Get you off to a big start on the show, but there's a lot more ahead on today's Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Job Creators Network.
Welcome back, America. Normally, when I play that thing you do, I'm smiling and happy. I'm not this morning. The writer of that song, Adam Schlesinger, co-founder of Fountains of Wayne, fame music group. Adam Schlesinger passed away yesterday from coronavirus at the age of 52. One of more than 5,000 Americans who have died. And the grim news, the grim totals continue to pile up. In Spain, it has just been reported minutes ago that the death toll has topped 10,000. These are numbers that are not in any way capable of communicating the grief. And I'm reminded of what C.S. Lewis said, if grief could be seen, the globe would be sheathed in black, and the black would be midnight black tonight. I want to play something from Joe Scarborough and tell you about a project Dwayne is working on this weekend. This is Joe on Morning Joe. Where does he say? No, I guess I don't have it. Joe said yesterday, oh, here it is. Everyone saw it. Cut number 1. Play it.
Now, we've heard, Zeke Emanuel, that nobody could have seen this coming. The fact is, everybody saw this coming. Everybody saw this coming in early January. So I know I know you, like me.
Now, I'm going to spend the weekend, Dwayne is going to spend the weekend preparing a program for you, because this show, I am not making a vain statement. I am stating a fact. This show was first. We were frequent, we were adamant that this was a danger. And we did not start until January 21st. The Wall Street Journal was the first major article I read about it, and then I began to sound the alarm. Tom Cotton was early to the bell. Admiral Stavridis was early to the bell. Nobody else was. And that's not to point a finger. It's to stop the pointing of fingers. I'm going to point it out. I'm going to make a show, a special next week, to prove to you what we did in January and February to alarm and sound the alarm for everybody about coronavirus. And nobody else did it. Now, I have 3 hours a day, and I got Dwayne. So I've got resources that nobody else has. And we are going to prove it so that it will make other people, not just Joe, I like Joe, everybody shut up about pointing fingers. Nobody knew how bad it would get, with the exception, perhaps, of me and Tom Cotton and Admiral Stavridis. Nobody. But we knew because we were familiar with both PRC and the 1918-20 plague. And therefore, we were alarmed. And we're going to prove it. In the meantime, everyone else who was walking around town and going to sporting events and telling people to go out, and I'm not going to name names, just shut up about this, because history will not be kind to you. You cannot rewrite history. Impeachment did impact the ability for my show and the people like Tom Cotton and Admiral Stavridis to be heard. That's what it did. There were no questions in the CBS News debate initiated by the panel about coronavirus. There was no mention in the NBC News debate about coronavirus. Nobody took it seriously until 2 weeks ago, and now we have 5,000 Americans dead. What's going on in the markets this morning? Brought to you by Birch Gold. Now remember, if you want gold, you text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. And gold, you should be diversifying your retirement. If you've done well in bonds, or you own Netflix or Amazon and you made money, you should diversify part of your retirement into gold and precious metals, and you do that with Birch Gold. You can do that today by going to hughgold.com. You can call them at 800-434-GOLD, or you can text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to gold. Gold is up above 1,600, but barely. It's up today, 1,602. Light crude is up today by 10% on news that the president's going to intervene. And the world markets, beginning in Hong Kong, England, and Germany, have all rallied. I expect today to be a very good day on the Dow. A good day to diversify. It's always a good day to diversify, and gold and precious metals ought to be at least 10% of your portfolio in your safety deposit box or in your IRA, guarded over at a physical location by Birch Gold Group. Text my name, Hugh, to 474747. And don't forget, if you own a small business, Go to jobcreatorsnetwork.com, jobcreatorsnetwork.com, and join today. They are battling for you, jobcreatorsnetwork.com. Let me move forward to a Welcome back, America. The person of Christ has never been far away from history. That is the point of the brand new book, Dominion, by Tom Holland, the Oxford Don, who joined me for a long conversation, pieces of which I am parceling out to get you through. Horrible 2 weeks. Here is part 2 of my conversation with Tom Holland. Let me move forward to a person I had never heard of, Tom Holland, Johann Streck, a Jesuit in the court of the empire in Beijing, who had sworn an oath to the Pope, who had clinked glasses with Galileo. I'm just amazed. How do I not know this? How do we not know that China got the Jesuits and the Jesuits got their astronomy department? And how do we not know this?
It is an amazing story that the Jesuits reached China and reached Beijing. There's particularly this remarkable figure, an Italian called Matteo Ricci, who gets there at the end of the 16th century and ends up basically a kind of Mandarin, an official Mandarin, the Chinese name, Chinese robes in the heart of the empire. But the thing that's fascinating about the role that the Jesuits play in China is that they are able to give the Chinese emperor and the Mandarinates thing that Chinese scholars can't, which is a very accurate understanding of when eclipses are going to happen. And the reason that they're able to do this is that one of the strange things about Christianity that perhaps people may find unexpected, I certainly did when I began to think about it, is that often the idea that there's something called religion and something called science and that these are opposed is quite a popular idea. It's something that Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens were both very keen on. In fact, science, the idea of science, the category of science, emerges from Christianity, and it emerges from it because what Christianity gives is the idea that there's a single explanation that embraces the whole of the universe, but also that the God who has organized and created and structured this universe is willing to be bound by laws himself. So in the Bible, in the Old Testament, he's bound by the covenant which he joins with the children of Israel, and in the New Testament, the new covenant that Paul speaks of, the covenant that has been brought about by Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. And what that means is that over the course of the Middle Ages, scholars start to think, well, if God has created the entire universe and he has laid down laws, then we can understand those laws. We can fathom those laws. So Galileo is the heir of this assumption, and the Jesuits are the heirs of this assumption. And there is absolutely no tension whatsoever between Christian faith and between the amazing breakthroughs in astronomy.
In fact, I want to celebrate your treatment of Galileo is revolutionary in that you fully flesh him out as a celebrity-minded, fame-hungry, gifted scientist moving among the court of Urban. I've never read this story, but I heard this story before. I'm running along. I was listening to it running and saying, I thought of poor Galileo locked in a jail or house arrest or whatever it is.
No, it's all a myth. It's
a myth.
It's a complete myth. And again, it's the great myth of the Enlightenment, the idea that Galileo was somehow, tortured or executed or whatever by the evil papacy because he wanted to prove the truth about science. None of this is remotely true. And Galileo couldn't prove what he was saying. He had no hard proof that the Earth went round the sun. And so the Inquisition said, well, give us the proof, and then that's fine. But if you can't give the proof, then, we're just going to stick with the consensus. And the consensus was, at the time, that the sun went round the Earth. So that's basically what it was about. But Galileo was as you say, basically a kind of, he was fame hungry. He wanted to make a splash, and so he ignored this. And this was at a time when the Catholic world and the Protestant world were meeting in the terrible conflict known as the 30 Years' War in Germany. And the papacy in Rome was anxious that things were going badly for the Catholics and that maybe Protestants would spill across the Alps and menace Rome. So it was a dangerous time for Galileo to be doing this. He was forced into silence, but he was not tortured. He was not locked up in prison. But the idea of him as a kind of persecuted martyr for science and liberty really began as Protestant propaganda. and then it got taken over by the Enlightenment thinkers, and now it's basically passed into the bloodstream. But the thing is that the Enlightenment and whatever you want to call it, people who are convinced that science has all the answers and things like that, they have myths just as much as Christians do, because they are themselves products of Christian assumptions, by and large.
And Dominion does pay due finely from the perspective of a serious historian to this very complicated iterative dialectic between Christianity and science. I just thought it was wonderful. I want to skip now. I don't want to abuse your time. I hope you start. By the way, in this period of plague, are you doing any live streams, Tom Holland? People would just swarm to watch you talk about Dominion, Rubicon, Islam. They would just tune in and watch you talk. Are you doing any of that?
I haven't been, but you encouraged me to think that perhaps they should be.
Oh, I think people would take an hour of Tom Holland every day just lecturing. You'd be overwhelmed.
Well, that's very kind of you to say so, and I might take that hint up.
All right, now,
we're all stuck in the house, so why not?
Right, why not? And so now I want to move to the execution of Charles. Interestingly enough, as I was listening to Dominion, I was reading for the first time, even though I'm sort of old, I finally got round to Copperfield. And of course, Charles lives in Mr. Dick's head in Copperfield. And here he is being executed in your book. And that's a turning point. Cromwell is a turning point. I never quite got this, that Cromwell, he embodies that Christian Reformation. It is remarkable what he embodies.
Well, Cromwell embodies a kind of a radical form of Protestantism,
yes,
which is essentially the conviction that what matters is not so much what the church tells you, that's kind of very much the Catholic idea, but specifically what the Bible tells you, but not just the hard words on the page. It's what the Spirit motivates you to understand about the words on the page. And that then means, in turn, the implication is that everyone should be free to follow their own truth. And this is the kind of revolutionary idea that is starting to germinate certainly in England in the middle of the 17th century, and also in the Dutch Republic on the other side of the North Sea. And England and the Dutch Republic, between them, start to germinate this idea that truth is a kind of enlightenment that is imprinted on the heart. And if you want to know the truth, you look into your heart, and that light will then kind of show you what you should do. Now, obviously, this is highly contested and shaded about by all kinds of ambivalences, because as a Catholic, I'm sure the one thing that you know about Cromwell...
an Irish Catholic. Irish Catholic.
Yeah, okay, so an Irish Catholic. So you know that Cromwell leads this very bloody invasion of Ireland and leads kind of all kinds of slaughter. But in England, he is oddly a voice of toleration. He sponsors this idea that people should not be persecuted for what they believe, and that they should be free to believe in what they want. And I think that explains a huge part of the tension between the way that, say, the English and the Irish traditionally have tended to view Cromwell. But Cromwell and the Dutch as well at the same time, these are people who are really blazing a path that will catch fire in America.
Well, this is why Dominion matters so much.
The Atlantic world, yes. And it plays I think that in a way the most interesting, certainly the most significant role, that this sense that you don't need specific things in the Bible to know what God wants is demonstrated in what will become the great campaign against slavery. Because notoriously there is nothing in the Bible that explicitly says that slavery as an institution is evil.
Right.
But because you have this idea that the Spirit illumines you and lets you know what is right, what happens over the course of the late 17th and then through the 18th century is that initially Quakers and then evangelicals, both in America and in Britain,
there are two ways.
Absolute conclusion that slavery must be abolished.
And it
This is what
detailed extirpation history is here. But there are two ways that books influence people. Ian Forster said, you're being influenced when you say, I might have written that if I just had a little more time. But there's also the more influential book that changes your understanding of a figure or an event. Now, my understanding of Cromwell is shaped by my Irish Catholicism. He's a hated figure in Ireland for good reason. But I also was in Westminster Abbey one day staring at his tomb, and a little old lady came up to me and said, he's not there. They dug him up. And I didn't know that. And I always thought, okay, evil man. In fact, he is the first I've taught con law for 25 years, Tom Holland, and a First Amendment seminar on religious liberty and free exercise for 20 years. I never would have put Cromwell down as a prime mover of Jeffersonian separation of church and state and religious liberty. And yet you prove up the case that he is.
This, I think, is what is so fascinating about the history of Christianity, is that it's essentially a kind of great Moebius strip of paradoxes. I don't know if you ever read Douglas Adams' science fiction novel, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And in that, there's a spaceship that is powered by paradox. And I think that Christianity is basically like that. It's been powered through time, across space, by paradox. And the idea of Cromwell, the butcher of Drogheda, being a godfather of religious liberty is just one of the many, many paradoxes. And of course, the greatest paradox of all is embodied in the foundational symbol of Christianity, the cross, which is an emblem of imperial power, of the right of the Roman state to torture to death anyone who opposes it, of the right of the master to torture to death the slave. And yet it's become the symbol of exactly the opposite of that, of the triumph of the weak over the strong. And essentially, that is what has changed the world. But it's also what makes tracking the process by which that change happens so difficult to do, because, as I say, it does throw up paradoxes and ambivalences of exactly the kind that you fixed on.
You also illustrate anecdotes are evidence of anecdotes, not of history. But by putting enough together, you illustrate this pattern, and that pattern continued yesterday. Hugh Hewitt live here. Dolly Parton, great Christian believer, donated $1 million to Vanderbilt yesterday because her longtime friend there, Dr. Abumrad, is working on a cure for the virus. That's why you need to read Dominion. Here's why you need to take ReliefFactor.com. Many of you have taken up walking or running. I see you out there, 6 feet apart, doing very good on the bike paths and the running paths of Washington, D.C. And I'll be out. Going to be a beautiful day inside the Beltway, and I'm going to try to do 7. Going to do 7 today, maybe a little bit more. It's so beautiful. Relief Factor will make that possible. I carry curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. The 4 natural supplements. I'm coughing into my sleeve. Allergies are also out. My coughs are allergies. I do not have COVID like Andrew Cuomo. Spare a prayer for him. It's a tough disease. I will be out running, socially safe, because Relief Factor makes it possible by supporting the temporary relief of the minor aches and pains that accompany good exercise. You need good exercise during this cruelest month of April. Go and get ReliefFactor.com. Come right back here. Welcome back, America. Standing by for Dr. Michael Oren from Israel. There are 950,000 cases of coronavirus around the world. 48,276 have died. In the Jewish state, there have been 6,211 cases, 32 deaths. And the Times of Israel reports this morning that Prime Minister Netanyahu and much of Israel's top brass are in quarantine because the health minister has gotten the virus. What I'm hoping to get from Dr. Oren, and I really would not be surprised if he does not join us this morning because of what's going on in Israel, is the coalition talks are reaching their critical moment. They're absolutely reaching their someone's got to give the last inch, or they got to swap a couple things around, and then we will have a government that will last for 5 years in Israel. Thank goodness that we will be done. And so we're not hearing from him. Maybe he doesn't really want to talk about his role in that. I get it. Let's go to Donald Trump instead. Yesterday, in the event you missed this, first I want to go to Deborah Birx, because she said something very, very important about the antibody test, cut number 33.
And then finally, we've reached out to the developers of the rapid test, the ones who developed it for malaria, the ones that developed them for HIV. It's exactly the same concept and process, to ask them to rapidly develop these tests, because I think we owe it to the frontline healthcare providers, not only to provide them RNA tests, but many of them have been on the front line now for 4 weeks, may have become exposed. We now know they're asymptomatic. And I think really being able to tell them the peace of mind that would come from knowing you already were infected, you have antibody, you're safe from reinfection 99.9% of the time. And so this, I think, would be very reassuring to our frontline healthcare workers. And our universities
yes,
can do that.
That's why we want that antibody test. But then Robert O'Brien, my buddy, stood up and was the president brought out the Nat security team yesterday. I want you to hear, this is Robert O'Brien, my longtime law partner and good friend. I hadn't seen him yet at any of the task force. There he showed up with his piercing blue eyes, looked right in the camera and said this, cut number 34.
I want the American people to know that President Trump and Vice President Pence and their administration are working tirelessly every day to protect the health and well-being of Americans and respond to the coronavirus. Our adversaries should take note, however, this president has a clear-eyed focus on America's national security interest. And let me be clear, it would be a mistake with terrible consequences for any adversary to attempt to do us harm during this health crisis, or ever for that matter.
General Milley also took to the microphone in the White House press briefing with the president on his right and said this, cut number 26.
Thank you, Secretary, for those words, and thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership. And I want to publicly thank Admiral Craig Fowler, the commander of U.S. Southern Command out of Miami, for leading this operation, which is underway effective today, and also Admiral Gilday, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Schultz, for their contributions to this from their services. There's thousands of sailors, Coast Guardsmen, soldiers, airmen, Marines involved in this operation. We came upon some intelligence some time ago that the drug cartels, as a result of COVID-19, were going to try to take advantage of the situation and try to infiltrate additional drugs into our country. As we know, there's 70,000 Americans die on an average annual basis to drugs. That's unacceptable. We're at war with COVID-19, we're at war with terrorists, and we are at war with the drug cartels as well. This is the United States military. You will not penetrate this country. You will not get past Jump Street. You're not going to come in here and kill additional Americans. And we will marshal whatever assets are required to prevent your entry into this country to kill Americans. So right now the Navy has marshaled additional Gray Hull ships from both PACOM and EUCOM and for the Naval Fleet at Norfolk. And they are set sail already, and they are in the Caribbean right now. In addition to that, there's 10 Coast Guard cutters, and there's Special Operations Forces and Security Force Assistance Brigades, along with Air Force reconnaissance aircraft. The bottom line is you're not going to get through. Now is not the time to try to penetrate the United States with illegal drugs to kill Americans. With the United States military, we will defend our country regardless of the cost. Thank you, Mr. President.
You will not get past Jump Street. Love that. Contrast Joe Biden from his basement Joe Biden, the basement tapes, with MSNBC's Brian Williams last night, cut number 37.
What is President Trump's level of culpability? What's his level of responsibility say toward the illness and fatalities we're witnessing every few minutes these days?
I put it slightly differently. What is his responsibility, and what if there was allocating responsibility is I'll let history do that.
They shouldn't let Joe stay up late. They really shouldn't. Shouldn't be doing the late show with Brian Williams. Not good for him. Good look. Not good for his campaign. I just contrast that with Miley and a million O'Brien and Burks and the president. More coming up, America. Hour number 2 leads off with Lieutenant General David Deptula from the Mitchell Institute of Aerospace Studies. Jim Talent, Chuck Todd's coming along today. Labor Secretary Gene Scalia, Josh Rogin. Lots more, and your phone calls. We have crossed 5,000 American dead. You heard the first warning on this show. You ought to get your news about the virus from this show every single day. It is the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by No Safe Spaces.
Morning, glory, America, bonjour, hi, Canada. It's Hugh Hewitt. I am joined by General David Deptula, retired from the United States Air Force. Good morning, General. How are you? Is everyone in the Deptula family well?
Yes, Hugh. Thank you very much. That's kind of you for asking. We're complying with all the rules and regulations and doing our very, very small part in trying to prohibit the expansion of this terrible disease.
Well, not surprisingly, we've added a few affiliates in the last few weeks, General, so I want to reintroduce you not just as the Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, not just as someone you can follow at Deptula_David, but as the principal attack planner for Operation Desert Storm, the commander of the no-fly operations over Iraq in the 1990s, the director of the air campaign over Afghanistan. You ran the air campaign when the 2005 South Asia tsunami relief operations occurred, and therefore you were in a perfect position to answer this question the president put out by tweet, and it was emphasized by General Miley yesterday. We are ready for anything in the Middle East, but how would we respond? What assets do we have, not only in Iraq, but in neighboring Qatar and Bahrain and other places to respond to any Iranian aggression there?
Well, the United States Department of Defense has elements of each service, airmen, soldiers, sailors, Marines, that are on watch and on duty throughout the Middle East. Obviously, I am most familiar with the air assets. They're located in a variety of different locations. I won't go into specifics, but the fact of the matter is they are at a extraordinarily high level of alert all the time, 24/7, 365, and the audience can rest assured that even facing some of the readiness impact of COVID-19, there are unique ways that our nation's military is taking to assure that they're ready to respond to any kind of aggression, deter that aggression, and then, if necessary, defeat it if, in fact, any kind of an adversary was to take advantage of the situation that we're going through and actualize any type of aggression.
Would you speak to readiness in the Air Force, particularly in some of the commands where the fighter squadrons are rather in close quarters, and it's not quite the same as the Teddy Roosevelt with 4,800 people on a ship? We'll come to that. But there are still close quarters for airmen and the crews and the pilots who have to be prepared to scramble.
Right. I had the opportunity to interview the Chief of the Staff of the Air Force, General Dave Goldfein, yesterday, and one of the issues that he talked about is the fact that we have to keep our military aircraft flying, and that means that we've got to keep air crews safe. The fact of the matter is, and he said something I thought that was very good, in that we need to take care of our people so they can take care of the nation. So specifically, in answer to your question, the Air Force flying operations are ones that are conducted from land, so therefore there are many more options to do distancing, both physical when you're located in an operational flying squadron, as well as going into time sequencing, where the pilots operate in shifts, whether those be coming in and operating at different hours or over different weeks. So there are a variety of different factors that can come to play in adjusting the operating conditions to continue those flying operations. Now, it doesn't mean that some training exercises have been canceled, which they have, and other actions have been taken to protect airmen from contracting this novel coronavirus. So it has had an impact, but there have been extraordinary means to make sure that the crews are safe.
Now, General, I'd like your opinion on the CEO of the Teddy Roosevelt. I am a fan of his letter. I heard the acting secretary and the CNO yesterday say it emerged not through the chain of command, which is concerned they will never know who leaked it. But what did you make of the CEO's letter to the higher chain of command about the situation on the Teddy Roosevelt requiring additional resources in an urgent fashion?
I think I read every word of Captain Crozier's letter, and you're right, Hugh. We may not know who released it, and frankly, it's one of those things that it's out there now, so it's less a concern about that, and rather, what's at issue here are the safety and well-being of the men and women that populate the Roosevelt. And my personal opinion is that Captain Crozier is to be commended for having the courage and the integrity for laying out his number one concern, and that was for the necessity to take actions to make sure his crew is safe. And he was very direct about it, and I think should be applauded. I mean, he made the point that, look, if we have to go to war, we'll go to war. We'll go to war with what we've got. But the fact of the matter is we're not at war, so it's imperative to take care of the Navy personnel involved. And like I say, I think it was an exemplary action that reflects an attitude of integrity and excellence in terms of trying to accomplish the mission.
Now, General Deptula, we are at a heightened level of concern in the Middle East. We have a strategic adversary in China whose deceit actually led to this situation, but we're not at war. The question becomes, though, ought we to be at the loose lips sink ships stage? Ought we not to bring a curtain down on who is sick in the military and where they're sick?
I think that it's prudent not to get into operational level details. Quite frankly, this is one of the concerns that former Secretary of Defense Mattis had in just how open and transparent the military has been traditionally in the past by releasing readiness statistics. And getting to the point that you're making, it's a similar kind of issue. We can discuss, and the department should discuss, numbers at large, but there's no necessity to get into the specificity of individual numbers at individual locations that may give an adversary insights that simply aren't necessary to be in public.
I'd like to play for you, Chief of Staff, Mike Miley, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, yesterday, cut number 26, and then I'll stop it at midpoint to get your reaction. Cut number 26.
Thank you, Secretary, for those words, and thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership. And I want to publicly thank Admiral Craig Fowler, the commander of U.S. Southern Command out of Miami, for leading this operation, which is underway effective today, and also Admiral Gilday, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Schultz, for their contributions to this from their services. There's thousands of sailors, Coast Guardsmen, soldiers, airmen, Marines involved in this operation. We came upon some intelligence some time ago that the drug cartels, as a result of COVID-19, were going to try to take advantage of the situation and try to infiltrate additional drugs into our country. As we know, there's 70,000 Americans die on an average annual basis to drugs. That's unacceptable. We're at war with COVID-19, we're at war with terrorists, and we are at war with the drug cartels as well. This is the United States military. You will not penetrate this country. You will not get past Jump Street. You're not going to come in here and kill additional Americans.
Stop right there. You will not get past Jump Street. What do you make of this, General?
I think it is a welcome response to an effort against the drug flow coming up from our southern border that, frankly, has been way too lackluster, in my humble opinion. Now, we have to corral resources and put them in the right place, but it's really refreshing to hear the chairman identify these issues and take actions which, again, reflect the readiness, status, and capability of the United States military. Yes, we've been affected by this by this disease, but actions are being taken to mitigate those conditions, and America's soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are still out there on the front lines defending America.
General David Deptula, retired United States Air Force. Thank you, General. Don't forget, America, Job Creators Network. If you're a small business impacted by this disease, go to jobcreatorsnetwork.com right now and join the alliance to protect small business in America. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. Sad news. Ellis Marsalis, legend in Louisiana and piano circles, passed away last night from the virus. I believe that, as with the age of AIDS, we will be bringing you terrible news about personalities every single morning. This morning, I am joined from Israel by Dr. Michael Oren for this and the next segment to update us both on Israel and the virus and the ongoing negotiations for a government. Let's begin. Good morning, Dr. Oren. How are the Oren family spread wide? How are you doing? Any illness?
No, we're all good. Thank God, Hugh. We're all good, and locked in. We've had 33 dead here, over 6,000 ill, and the government is warning that there are many, many bad things to come. So no change, no hope in sight, or no end of this conflict, no end of the crisis, as far as we can see.
Now, the Prime Minister announced this morning he's gone into quarantine because the health minister has been diagnosed with the virus. That doesn't really impact, but you tell me how it impacts. In Great Britain, Boris is carrying on, I'm sure, and he's got it, not just quarantine, he's got it. How will that impact, if at all, the functioning of the government of Israel?
Well, it won't, because Netanyahu has already been self-quarantined for several weeks now and hasn't been meeting, face-to-face with anyone as far as I can see, other than the National Security Advisor. It's all done through, internal teleconferencing here. So that has not impacted anything. And in fact, the country is functioning. There's water, there's electricity. But Israelis now are being very careful. I'm looking out the window at Jaffa here, and the streets are pretty empty.
Your health minister, Litzman, is doing well, but showing mild symptoms. Anybody you know with the serious symptoms?
Anyone we know personally, no. There are about 60 people who are hospitalized, but the biggest, over 60% of the people who are hospitalized are ultra-Orthodox Jews, in communities that at first did not obey the rules to stay inside, to lock down, to do the social distancing. And now they're paying the price, and frankly, we're paying a bit of their price for their failure to conform with the regulations.
Do you believe that is shifting in real time?
It has to shift in real time, and the heads of their communities, they obey the rulings of their rabbis. The rabbis have now come out belatedly, tragically, and said they have to preserve social distancing. But the police are out giving tickets, and you can get as much as 6 months jail time for violating a quarantine order.
How do you believe the readiness of the IDF is?
It's ready. Well, the IDF now is deploying several hundred soldiers, unarmed soldiers, to aid the police in monitoring the quarantine and the lockdown. But we have to be on our guard. I'm concerned about the situation with Iran, personally. It's interesting. There's been a lot of talk in the United States about possibly lifting the sanctions on Iran because the Iranian people are suffering so much from corona. And I don't doubt that they're suffering a lot from corona, overwhelmingly because of the incompetence and corruption of their own government. But I don't understand here why aren't people saying, well, we shouldn't lift the sanctions until Iran stops spending billions of dollars on supporting terror all over the world instead of helping its own population. I haven't heard anybody say that yet.
I do not believe the sanctions will be lifted. I know O'Brien pretty well. I know Secretary of State Pompeo very well. They're just not going to lift these sanctions unless the government does the sort of things which a normal state would do in a situation like this, which is throw everything into the well-being of their population and stop the nuclear and ballistic missile programs. I mean, don't you think those are minimums?
For terror. Yeah, and for terror. I don't know how you can say they're giving $1 billion a year to Hezbollah to kill people around the world, to kill Syrians, to kill Israelis, and then come complain to the world community that they don't have enough money to fight corona.
I'd like you to stick through the break if you can, Michael Oren. Can you give us a quick update on Jordan and Lebanon?
Jordan and Lebanon are also having, their crises. It's interesting how insular your society becomes. I mean, you actually have to go online and look at what's happening in different countries to find out what's happening around the world, because so many countries are focused on their own problems. And you almost can't get it from, say, television news. You can't even get it from, the mainstream journalism. You have to go online and search. So this morning I was interested in what was happening in Australia. Interesting.
I'll be right back with Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, former deputy minister of Israel. Maybe he's going into the new government. We'll find out after the break. That we are going to talk about what's going on in Israel politically as well as medically. Just like the United States, of enormous interest to this audience. Stay tuned. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Welcome back, America. If Dr. Oren ends up at the UN, they're going to have to play this music whenever he walks in. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I am talking with Dr. Michael Oren. That's the Mandalorian theme song. Dr. Oren, let's get to the conversation about what is going on. I read everything, and trying to figure out Israeli politics is like doing a jigsaw puzzle with 2/3 of the pieces missing. I really have no idea what's going on. I read everything, but it's a foreign government to me, and I have no idea. Give us an update.
Update. So you remember for the last couple of weeks, Hugh, I was telling you that even though they didn't know it, Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu were going to form a national unity government.
Yes.
Remember that one? And
yes.
then I think about 2 hours after we spoke last week, they formed a national unity government.
Yes.
And the reasons were the numbers, because Benny Gantz had to join the national government. His own party would have overthrown him if he would have run in a fourth election. Bibi needed cover to be prime minister when he appeared in court, because in Israel, only the prime minister, if he's indicted, doesn't have to resign. He can defend himself as prime minister. So it worked out very well for everybody involved. Now comes all the horse trading. Who's going to get which portfolio, which minister? Benny Gantz positioned himself brilliantly. He became Speaker of the Knesset, which is not the highest-ranking job in the Israeli world, but it's sort of like putting the king in check with a pawn. Because the Speaker of Knesset can determine who heads which committees, including finance committees, legal committees, and even if Bibi's prime minister, as Speaker of the Knesset, Benny Gantz can stop him from moving any legislation forward. So it's a very smart move. Now the question is, who's going to be the defense minister, who's going to be the health minister, who's going to be the foreign minister?
And could you pause for a moment, Dr. Oren? We got Steelers fans who are listening. What are these ministries? They're like cabinet jobs, but how much authority do they have, and how do they rank in the Israeli pantheon of power?
Because, you remember that old book, Doris wrote about the team of rivals for Lincoln.
Yep.
Lincoln's team of rivals was nothing compared to an Israeli team of rivals, because every member of an Israeli cabinet is actually a politician, not appointed by the prime minister. He's a politician who is seeking to overthrow the prime minister, the prime minister himself. Go figure that one out. And so there's almost a hierarchy of these positions. The defense minister has a lot of power. The finance minister has a lot of power. The foreign minister doesn't have a lot of power, but it's highly exposed. There's a lot of exposure to it. You get to take a lot of pictures with foreign leaders, and you can't really fail at it. There's never been a failed Israeli foreign minister. But you can fail as defense minister and finance minister. There's a risk involved. The big issue so far, believe it or not, has to do with Israel's relationship with the United States, specifically the annexation of large parts of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, particularly the Jordan Valley, which apparently was promised by at least part of the Trump peace team as part of the Trump peace plan. And Netanyahu wants to annex immediately as soon as the government is formed. Benny Gantz, who represents sort of the center and center-left, wants to put on the brakes and hold off and see what the Jordanians and the Egyptians say. And that's becoming a bit of a sticking point about whether this government will move right ahead with annexation. My own feeling is that annexation has to be put off until such a time as President Trump gives an absolutely unequivocal green light to it. Because the last thing we want to do is have a conflict with this president, who's been the friendliest administration we've had since 1948.
So will they resolve this? I believe that the remit that Benny Gantz holds to form a government expires soon. If it expires, does Netanyahu blow it all up because Gantz can't go home again?
I kind of doubt it. I think at this point, everybody knows we need a national unity government. This country is in the throes of an unprecedented crisis. We have a third of the country unemployed, with thousands and thousands expected to die. Our own the person who's heading this task force is telling us that thousands are going to die. This is no time for politicians to be wrangling. And keep in mind, while a third of the country is unemployed, these guys are getting full salaries. And we could have ourselves a political crisis on top of the health crisis. So I think there's a tremendous pressure on both these heads of parties to come together and iron out these differences. It really should not be insurmountable.
I have seen some reporting that the Justice Ministry is a point of contention because, and I learned this when I was last in Israel, Likud and parties to the right believe that your Supreme Court is out of control in a way that even conservatives in the United States didn't believe the Warren Court is out of control. What's your perspective on the Justice Ministry portfolio, where it will go and what it matters?
I think at some point it will probably go to blue and white, but I think it's immaterial because the fact of the matter is our elective legislative, our executive branch is on a collision course with the judiciary. And I'll try to make this as simple as possible. Unlike the citizens of the United States who have not one but two opportunities to influence the composition of the Supreme Court. Hugh, you vote for president, you vote for Senate. We have absolutely as citizens, no impact on the composition of our Supreme Court. Our Supreme Court justices are chosen by jurists themselves, including sitting Supreme Court justices. So in terms of their worldview, the Supreme Court justices pretty much stay in the same place, because you're going to choose someone who thinks like you do, right? Whereas the Knesset, which reflects public opinion, has moved, and has moved very much to the right. So there's a huge gap that's opened up between the Supreme Court and the elected officials of the State of Israel, and our Supreme Court is very, very activist. It believes that everything is judiciable, everything. So this puts us into this collision course, and I don't care who's going to be the justice minister. That collision can only be resolved by reforming deeply the way Supreme Court judges are chosen to make our system much more similar to the American system.
Tell me what you expect for the Netanyahu trial, Ambassador Oren.
Well, first of all, it's been put off because our legal system also is in lockdown. So it's not going to be happening in the near future. And frankly, it could take years. It could take years, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure if any of these accusations can stick against him. I know some of them wouldn't even come to a trial in the United States. We have different laws, and I think he can fight it. And I'd give him a better than equal chance of coming out of it acquitted. But it could be years and years in court.
Do you expect that the Netanyahu-Gantz relationship will improve with time or fracture with time?
It's not about friendships. It's about interests. And I think that if we can emerge from this crisis and go immediately into an interaction with the Trump administration on the peace plan, then I think the relationship between Bibi and Benny become even more important, because each of them have in their parties radical left and radical right factions which will oppose the peace plan. So these two individuals are going to need each other if they're to maintain our relationship with the Trump administration and with the United States.
Now, in terms of the relationship with you and this group of people that will emerge, are you friends with everybody? Is that my general understanding of your position?
I know. That doesn't sound good. It sounds kind of wimpy, but it's true. Benny Gantz was my military attaché in Washington when I was ambassador, and of course I worked with Benjamin Netanyahu for many years, so I have good relations with all across the board. So
you were an opta, given that position of basic telescopic observational ability on both sides. Is this going to work? And how many people will be in the coalition? And who's going to get left on the outside? Is Lieberman on the outside looking in on elections that he triggered?
Lieberman's on the outside looking in, but he seems in the short run to be the loser. I don't know. There's a lot of anguish and anger at those ultra-Orthodox Jews who didn't listen to the instructions about lockdown and helped spread this disease. And Lieberman is the leading anti-ultra-Orthodox politician in Israel. So he's got a campaign to run there, right there. So it's all to eulogize Mr. Lieberman's political career. But I think that there's a good chance we'd have a period of political stability if they can iron out these last differences about who gets what position and what the government policy is going to be on annexation.
Do you expect a rotation in the prime ministership to actually happen? I read with some interest the skepticism in some of Israeli political commentary that will ever happen.
And I think it'll happen. It's being guaranteed by some other prominent politicians. The question is, how long does it happen? The precedent for this was back in the 1980s with Yitzhak Shamir and Shimon Peres, and then they rotated. Peres was first. Shimon Shamir came second. The minute Shamir got in there, it was only a couple of months before Shimon Peres orchestrated the downfall of that government, known as the dirty trick in Israel. So I think that Benny Gantz could be prime minister. I don't know for how long.
A last question, Dr. Oren, on Meet the Press this weekend. I kind of stunned a few people when I said I would like American politicians to take a cue from Benny Gantz, and I explained that he had laid down his ambitions in order to serve in the Netanyahu government. I don't know that any Democrats will lie down with the Republicans, but do you admire Gantz for what he did?
I do. I don't think it was solely altruistic. I think that it was the only way he could have survived politically, doing what he did. That doesn't in any way diminish the fact that he did take some tremendous hits. He's had protests outside his house and really come up with tremendously deeply excoriated for what he did. But in fact, he did make that sacrifice for this country. And I, as a citizen, I appreciate it.
Are you going to be serving in this government?
Not in not an elected capacity, but as I always say, if called to the flag, I will report.
Dr. Michael Oren, I appreciate the update. It is confusing. Very last question: will we have a resolution today?
On this, no. I think we'll have a couple more days of wrangling here, but I'm really not I'm not disturbed by it. I hope I'm not being Pollyannish about it. I think that there's a force majeure here, and that is this country needs this government. And if they don't acquiesce to that call, then there'll be a price to pay. It'll be very, very, very sad.
Dr. Michael Oren on Twitter, Dr. Michael Oren. Thank you, America. Time for me to tell you about my other couple of things I got to tell you about. No Safe Spaces. Dennis Prager, Adam Carolla's amazing movie is available for 25% off on your nosafespaces.com viewing space. Just put Save 25. Save 25. You get 25% off. You can watch it all the way to the end of May. It's a terrific flick. It's a wonderful film. Dennis is funny. Adam is funnier. I want Dennis to hear that. Dennis is funny. Adam is funnier. Dennis is funny. Adam is funnier. NoSafeSpaces.com. Also want to remind you, Job Creators Network. Job Creators Network, JobCreatorsNetwork.com. If you're a small business, you need them for phase 4 of legislation that comes to fix anything that jobs, especially restaurants and advertising-dependent businesses, need the Job Creators Network to step up. Now, pre-market, brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. I'm watching markets continually. Overseas, Japan was down 1 1/3 point. I believe they didn't really figure out what the president said about the oil market, trying to bring all the parties together to reestablish some coherence. There's way too much oil being pumped, and as a result, oil has rallied almost 10% overnight to $22. Gold is up to $16.06. This is brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. Andrew Del Rey, Todd Avakian. Go get your mortgage from them. AndrewandTodd.com, 888-888-1172. Refinances, new purchases, rental houses, reverse mortgages, VA. They've been up and running online for years, so they know how to do it. They're not improvising. AndrewandTodd.com. Market's looking good for the day, but we will wait and see. You never can tell, but you can say that AndrewandTodd.com are reliable. As you can say about ReliefFactor.com. Took mine in the first hour, reminding you in the second hour, if you are like me and you're getting a lot more exercise than you normally do, you may be getting more aches and pains. If you're going further, farther, more often because you got more times on your hand and you can socially isolate when you're out walking and running, and you say, wow, my hamstrings hurt. ReliefFactor.com. Wow, I got some shin splints. ReliefFactor.com. Support, temporary support for the relief of minor aches and pains. It is Icarian curcumin, resveratrol, omega, 4 natural supplements. The only supplement I take my vitamins, of course, but these are the only natural supplements I take. It works. $19.95. And don't forget HonorBoundCoffee.com. HonorBoundCoffee.com. 100% of the profits of every cup of coffee you drink go to support military profits when you order through HonorBoundCoffee.com. Come right back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Jim Talent, former senator from Missouri. Good morning, Senator Talent. How are you?
Doing well, Hugh. Hope everything is good there with you.
It is. I want to quote to you last night on Fox News. Dr. Stephen Smith, an infectious disease specialist, said of hydroxychloroquine and the erythromycin combo that, quote, "it is a game changer. It's an absolute game changer. I think this is the beginning of the end of the pandemic. I'm very serious." Now, that may or may not be true. I want to hear it from Birx or Fauci. What do you think of it?
Yeah, it sounds very promising. And from the beginning, I thought that therapeutics were probably the thing that we could get the quickest that would be a game changer. Because if we reduce the severity of the disease, okay, it becomes much, much more manageable. What we're going through now is largely because they're justifiably concerned about our surge capability to handle severe cases. So if we have a treatment that will cut the severity of the disease in a number of those cases, the disease really then does begin to look more like a flu, which changes really everything. So yeah, I'm hopeful.
Now, Senator, I got to tell my new listeners in the Tri-City areas of Tennessee and Virginia, down on 92.9, you know of which you speak because you ran the biological task force with Senator Graham for so many years. And so for the benefit of Super Talk 92.9 in Bristol and Kingsport and Johnson City, what do you make of the slides that Dr. Fauci and Birx and the president are showing with that curve about 100 to 250,000 deaths? Do you think that can come lower?
Oh, yeah. And typically with pandemics, as they go on and as we just discover how many people actually have the disease, the mortality rate that we estimate for the pandemic begins to drift down. Because what they don't know, they don't know how many people have this. They don't know how many people have had it, okay? But it depends on what people do in terms of social distancing. It depends on how quickly we get a really vigorous testing regime, and we're almost there. I mean, I think Pence said we're testing over 100,000 a day, so we're making.
Yeah, we're at 1.2 million. We're at 1.2 million.
And I think the states are galvanizing to do the kind of containment measures that Dr. Fauci talked about yesterday. So, look, I've been hopeful about this, given that we are where we are for probably a month. Now, there's going to be losses. There have been, and they're going to continue to be. But I think we are responding in an extremely vigorous fashion. And the other thing, is we don't know what happens, because this is the first time in history when the life science community in the whole world, plus a number of entrepreneurs and innovators, are focused on one problem set, which is stopping this virus. So we could get a breakthrough someplace. And, we think about the Israelis, the Europeans, the Chinese. I mean, yeah, the government's behaved despicably, but they have a lot of health capabilities as well.
Jim Talent, tell me what you think about the efficacy of a random test for the disease of 1,000 people in 25 metro areas as a baseline for figuring surveillance necessity and penetration, whether it's Kansas City and St. Louis or Columbus, Ohio, or Philadelphia. I mean, I know where the hot spots are. I'd like to know where the disease is in an asymptomatic form in major metropolitan areas. Are we doing that?
Yeah. Well, we don't have the serology test as of yet. Fauci talked about it yesterday. He said the priority right now is testing to see people who are currently infected. I agree with that. But I think to get back to semi-normal or normal in terms of civil society and the economy, it's going to be very important to know who has been exposed and who has recovered. Because I was really pleased, Dr. Birx said yesterday, and I've been saying this all along, when people say, well, you can get reinfected. She said, look, in the short term, if you have been exposed and you have recovered, you are basically immune. And
99.97%.
That's what she said, and that's what virology tells us. So once we know or begin to find out the millions of people who very probably who've had this and who've recovered, they are now free to go out. They're free to help their neighbors. They're free to go back to work. They're free to go to the office and pick up the mail while everybody else works remotely. And yes, they're free to go back to reopen bars and restaurants and hospitality areas. So I think that test is very important. Fauci said it's not their number one priority. I get that. but they are focusing on it. She said she's talked to everybody about trying to be able to perform it, and I think it's got to move to the top of the list as we move through these measures.
1 minute, Jim Talent. How hard is it to produce the antibody test?
Well, now there you're going to have to get Birx or Fauci or an expert on there. They've done it a number of times, so I think it's probably like vaccines. It's a question of moving through the various testing phases. I'm sure they have a lot of ideas right now. I think she said, look, we've done this already for a lot of viruses, so we will get that. I think that in the shorter term is a great possibility as well. The vaccine isn't coming for a while. That's what everybody tells me, okay? But these other measures can be game changers in the short term, and we've got to focus on getting it and also hoping that warmer weather helps. I don't like people who poo-poo that. I think warmer weather, there's a good chance. We don't know for certain, but I think warmer weather is going to help us in fighting the disease.
Follow Jim Talent on Twitter at Jim Talent. Follow me there at Hugh Hewitt if you want the latest updates and news. And follow me to the next hour, Chuck Todd, Labor Secretary Gene Scalia, Josh Rogin of the Washington Post, and your phone calls at 1-800-520-1234. Also go to YouTube, sign up for my channel. You'll see all these interviews over at the YouTube Hugh Hewitt channel. And I'll be right back. Morning, Glory America, bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings to everyone in the United States as the international death toll crosses the case toll totals 950,000 cases, the death toll approaching 50,000, crossing 5,000 in the United States. I'm joined by Chuck Todd, NBC's political director, host, of course, of Meet the Press. Good morning, Chuck. It should have been opening day today in D.C. It's not.
Yeah, is that today? It's every day. I was just telling Dwayne, every day it seems like there's another discussion I have with my kids about something else that they've been looking forward to, or something else that they're curious about that I'm telling them is, look, it ain't going to happen, or it's probably not going to happen, or you better temper your expectations. It is one of those things. It's like the other thing Dwayne and I were talking about is I'm skeptical football season's going to happen.
Ooh, don't say that. Oh, my gosh.
I know. I know. And in fact, I've had part of me has thought, you really want to motivate America to do social distancing? You tell them, you want football season?
Yeah, you're
want
right.
Football season? Keep your butts in your house. Put some face masks on. Everybody shelter in place. I mean, if there is one sport that might motivate parts of America, it's that one. You tell them,
Roger
look,
Goodell.
Or not. Imagine the fall without it.
Roger Goodell, I hope you are listening. All right, Chuck Todd, to the news. You're doing yeoman's work, working from home, as does all of our colleagues at NBC. One of my former colleagues at CNN, Chris Cuomo, is sick now. It's a tough disease. I don't know that people understand how tough it is, even if you're young and healthy. And Chris Cuomo is young and healthy as a horse.
Yeah, no, I have I have an acquaintance, would be a little more than an acquaintance, who's same age, okay? When I say same age, within the 3 or 4 year range of myself, Chris Cuomo, this person, perfectly healthy, in ICU 8 days, has recovered, but it is the stories of this thing. This thing is vicious. This thing is vicious on folks who I thought were perfectly healthy. And then the other thing that's scary about this is, yes, it's harder on people with an underlying condition. But, a lot of us don't know if we have an underlying condition yet. You might not have had. Look at Chris Cuomo's 49. All right? There's a few of those checkups you don't have yet until you hit 50.
Exactly.
Right? So maybe he has one, maybe he doesn't, but you don't know when you're in your late 30s or your early to mid 40s or you're even your late 40s when you haven't had the full roto-rooter, I call it, right? That next level. Every 5 years, once you get in your roto-rooter. Well, okay, it happens a lot more in your 50s, but you may not know. So you may think you're healthy and you have this underlying condition, and this thing could just sap you. I mean, it is the stories. It's clearly what impacted the president. I mean, He is clearly rattled by this friend who slipped into a coma. And I can tell you, I'm an obsessive reader of the New York Times obits. Right? I always say it's a history lesson every day. The notable obituaries, around the world of famous people, or notable people in their fields, and this one and this or that. I think yesterday was the first day where every single person was a coronavirus victim.
Wow. Yeah. Hadn't known that. All right, Chuck, to the right wing, I have been the Iron Dome. I have been shooting down right-wing criticisms of the media because I believe that Yamich and Acosta and you're all just doing your job, and I believe you're doing it well. And I'm going to continue to do that. But I also sense in the White House press room, and Jim Acosta and I had an exchange on this, there really is a changing mood. I think people are beginning to look at these numbers and realize no one will not be touched.
Oh, I think there's this is the thing, there's real fear. And this is what's coming next. I think there's real fear and concern. And this is, I forget the media. I'm talking about in the general public.
Yes.
And one thing the media does is I think the media channels the public more than I think they get credit for sometimes. But that's to me, that's a job at times of the press. Channel where the public is. Right now you have fear and anxiety. That's at some point going to change to anger, and that to me is the next political cross whatever you want to call it, crossroads that we're going to hit when, say, after week 3 of this, where that anxiety and that fear go to frustration and anger and all this stuff, and that's going to create yet a different kind of movement. We're going to go through different stages of moods as a country that is going to be, I think, reflected at different times, and maybe that press briefing ends up being how it expresses itself. But listen, in the same way we're all cooped up. I'm sure everybody that's listening, yourself included, I imagine, I know I have. I've woken up one day and going, oh my God, am I going to repeat the same day over and over again, right? And it, it's not the best mood, right? And
no, it's what I do. I have a day.
I have to will myself.
Same day.
I have to will myself, right, to basically say, hey, you got to set an example for your kids. You got to set an example for your neighbors. You got to set an example for but it's going to get harder and harder. And
no, I've been impressed by an interview I did with Larry Hogan and one I did with Josh Shapiro. Republican Governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, Democratic Attorney General of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, in the last 5 days. Both of them are prepared for civil unrest because it may be that some areas of the states in which they have authority could find themselves plagued by either crime or outbreaks of shortage-related violence. Have you heard of any other preparations, Chuck Todd?
Wow, I have not. I do. I have. I know that high-end retail stores didn't just shut down; they boarded up.
Yep.
I don't know if you've noticed that your Cartiers, your Rolex, the sort of super high-end, for fear of that a little bit. And I have not, but this is the type of thing if there is a run on resources, right, a scarcity of resources is when this happens. I still think this will more likely to happen in other countries before it happens here, but I don't think you can assume it won't.
2 days before yesterday's briefing, a detective in Oakland called me to tell me that the cartels are treating this like the open door to America. I believe that's why the briefing was held yesterday, not for the benefit of the American public, but to message to the cartels, we know what you're doing, and we're going. Millie was wonderful. You're not going to get off Jump Street. What did you think of that?
No, I thought that's exactly what it felt like, too. I think it was one of those, like, the public's like, what are you talking about right now? But I'm with you, and almost like they're what normally, and Courtney Cubey said, this normally wouldn't be something you'd make public. But in a weird way, I think you're making the point of why they chose to make it public, because they were simply trying to message to those guys directly. It's sort of like, hey, you may think we're all focused on one thing, and but we're still patrolling, so watch out.
All right, last question. Last Sunday when I was on, I'm so glad you gave Joe Biden time. I hope everybody gives him a lot of time because this is America and we're in election season. He needs to be able to campaign. He needs time. Does he get enough time?
I don't know, and I will say this. I think this is a case where, and we're going to have this conversation, I think, so many different ways and times between now and November. But I've been thinking about this. It may be a good thing the Democrats have somebody as well-known as Biden, that if they had somebody who still is somewhat new, like a Barack Obama, like had this happened and a Barack Obama sitting here as their nominee, first-time nominee, and you're sort of, has he done this before? I think in a weird way, the familiarity with him means he can ride it out better than another candidate in this similar situation. But I think this is going to be a real challenge for him. I think that's why he, I believe, does not say no to any interview requests. So, Hugh, put it in.
Oh, got to do that. You know what? I like the vice president. I think he needs a new set. I'm sitting here in a Today Show designer set in my home studio, and you've got one too. Doesn't he need a new set?
Yeah, I look, I guess, but my bosses wish that I could rearrange some things in my house here. There's only so much you can do.
No, there's only so much space, and you got to cram it in. Chuck Todd will be watching at 5 o'clock.
I do have 2 dogs and 2, and I'm sure Biden does too. There's only so much places you can stick these things.
And teenagers do not stay out of houses in the way that grown-ups do. Good luck, Chuck Todd. We'll see you on Sunday. Right. If it's Sunday, it will be Meet the Press. Thank you, Chuck. I also tell everyone, over at WashingtonPost.com, you can find in the paper, the real paper that's on your stoop today, is my ode to opening day. And I wrote it because the person for whom I am named, Hugh Hewitt, not a son of Ireland, his dad was from Ireland, came out of St. Field in 1868. Judge Hugh Hewitt attended 40 home openers of the Cleveland Indians. That was his thing. That was his own, that's when time began for him every year. And opening day not happening means that opening day, when it comes, is going to be a very big deal. So if you go to WashingtonPost.com, or actually just go to Hugh Hewitt and Washington Post on Google, you can read what I think about opening day this year. When it comes, we'll know we have turned the corner when we get to opening day. Chuck's right, though. If Roger Goodell comes out and says no social distancing, no NFL, then we'll have social distancing. Great point. I'll be right back on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by No Safe Spaces.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Generalissimo. Why? Because although I'll do a market update shortly, Generalissimo is married to Eskimo Pie Eyes, and EPE is a teacher, and I guess she's teaching, but they've closed the schools in Orange County or California for how long?
It's statewide. From my understanding, the State Board of Education decided to close down school the rest of the year, meaning everything's online. They've been doing online. Different districts have spring break in different weeks. The district where she teaches is having spring break this week, but it came down, South County, Capo Valley shut down first, and ours did, Tustin did, Santa Ana did. The rest of the state followed suit very, very quickly. All the schools that are doing online learning through Zoom or Canvas or other, streaming video conferencing websites, they're going to have to continue that the rest of the year. And people haven't realized what the impact of that is. The impact is the schools are closed down, meaning the physical schools are closed down. So there's no graduation ceremonies coming. If you're a senior, well, you don't get the cap and gown. You don't get the handshake. You don't get the picture and the pomp and circumstance. You don't
get prom.
Done.
Do you know that the
you
Nixon
don't get prom?
Library
You don't
been
get prom.
home to prom for 20 years, and we do a dozen or so proms every year. And I feel bad for kids. It's just a ritual, right?
Right. If you're in middle school and you're going to promote from middle school up to high school, you don't get that, graduation ceremony or promotion ceremony.
Okay, you've sparked in me a need to play Backstreet Boys, and I hope you can go find it. I got to tell people I owe my daughter an apology. The Backstreet Boys released a video, which I'm going to play for you, and I put online, my daughter just fainted, only to hear from her immediately that she was Team NSYNC, which, of course, I can't remember the difference between the two.
They're really the same. They're
the same band.
It's the same band.
But can we play a little bit of that video, please? I want people to. I would encourage everyone to Google Backstreet Boy. I don't think there's a lick of difference, but my daughter, my apologies. I know you're Team NSYNC. Actually, I had to see Titanic only 8 times. I don't want to overstate the case. Gosh, to have been a 14-year-old, to have a 13-year-old daughter in the age of NSYNC and Backstreet Boys. Luckily, the fetching Mrs. Hewitt took her and her screaming friends to see NSYNC. I didn't have to do that.
The hardest part...
Wait, I got to do the market report. I got to do the market report. Brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. AndrewandTodd.com are open for business. Luckily, they went online years ago. If you go to AndrewandTodd.com, their whole team is working on the applications to refinance your home, buy a new home, get a reverse mortgage if you're a senior and you're in trouble. Lower your interest rate, get your application ready. You don't have to lock. You might want to lock. The mortgage industry is back in business. Overnight, Hong Kong, England, and Germany rallied. I expect a good day on the market today. I expect that markets are going to get used to this. Oil is up. It means that now might be the time to lock, but leave that up to AndrewandTodd.com with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. Call them at 888-888-1172. You want it your way, 888-888-1172. I'll be right back, America. Labor Secretary Gene Scalia joins me, and we're going to do Unemployment 101, all right? If you've never been unemployed before and you are, now is the time to listen to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Job Creators Network.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt from the ReliefFactor.com studio inside the Beltway, which is locked down. I am joined by Labor Secretary Gene Scalia. You can follow him on Twitter at SecGene, Gene Scalia. Got to go spell it out, Mr. Secretary, for the Steelers fans. Good to have you back. Welcome.
Hugh, good to join you again.
How is the Scalia clan far and wide?
My family's well. Thanks for asking. I have 8 brothers and sisters, and there are a lot of grandkids of my parents too. My mom lives near me, and she's had to stay at home, but we're checking in on her, and she's doing fine.
I was reminded last night, before I get to the substance, by a fellow Catholic friend that priests are particularly isolated. They live for their communities, their parishes, their congregations. How's your brother, the priest, doing?
Paul's doing well, and he actually wrote a really thoughtful piece about what you're describing, how being away from his congregation, his parishioners, was a reminder to him and fellow priests of what an important part of their role, just being out in the community, was. So, it's such a challenging time in so many ways, and as you're suggesting, we're being reminded of some things that are really very valuable, very important, that we might have come to take for granted just a little bit.
Well, those of us who are Catholics might pray a few beads for those priests who serve us so well and who are lonely. Now, Secretary Scalia, the business part. A lot of Americans are facing unemployment for the very first time. I'm 64 years old. I have worked continually since I'm 15. I've never had to file for unemployment benefits. I would have no idea how to do it. How do you do it?
Well, Hugh, I should say, first of all, that we just released our new numbers regarding initial claims for unemployment filed last week. And it's a very, very sizable number. Over 6.6 million new claims for unemployment were filed last week. The week before it had been nearly 3.3, which was a record, but this number is much higher, and it's very sobering. And it's a reflection, obviously, not of a fundamental weakness in our economy, but of some very hard measures we're having to take, and they're having a real impact on Americans across the country. So I wanted to pass that number along. And in terms of how you file, it's with the states. The Labor Department here in Washington, we help oversee the unemployment insurance system, but you file with your state unemployment insurance agency and make that claim, and then they process the claim from there.
Now, if you're in California, that would mean you would Google California State Unemployment Insurance Agency and follow the steps, correct?
That's right. I mean, that will find it for you. We're actually going to be posting on our website at dol.gov our own listing of the state unemployment insurance agencies in case people need help locating them. But sadly, these numbers that I just gave to you would indicate that people, if nothing else, are succeeding in finding the unemployment insurance agencies. And we'll continue to work with those agencies to facilitate their processing of these claims.
Now, I want to ask you a couple of specific questions that have come to my attention from people that I know. If you hold 2 or 3 jobs and you've lost one, are you eligible for unemployment benefits?
Well, it's going to depend on the rules of the different states, and it will depend also on how many hours you are putting in on those different jobs. I think typically in the states, and it will vary, but if you had 2 more or less full-time jobs, lose one, you're likely not going to be eligible for unemployment benefits. On the other hand, if they're both relatively short-term and now you're working less than, substantially less than half the week, you're probably eligible.
You know, I do not think that's rational, Secretary Scalia, and I would urge you to consult with your counterparts at the state. People who work 2 full-time jobs are legendary in America, and they do it so their kids can go to college and that they can put food on the table, or so that a spouse can stay at home. I think they ought to be eligible because their lives depend upon 2 paychecks.
Well, it's going to be a challenging time for people who are out of work, whether they've had 1 or 2 jobs. And Hugh, the president signed this legislation last week, the CARES Act. This is the $2.2 trillion relief package, and it does include, let me mention two things that are in it. One is a substantial increase in the payments that are available to the states under the unemployment insurance system. There are an additional $600 a week that are being made available by the federal government to supplement what the states make available. And the idea there is we really want to get as close as we can to making people whole for income they've lost from measures that we're having to take as a nation to protect the national health. So that is, I think, one good piece of news for people who find themselves having to apply for unemployment insurance. The other thing that, Hugh, I think in some ways is more important, it's a provision in the CARES Act that makes $350 billion in loans available to small business. And those loans are forgivable if those small businesses keep their workers on the payroll. And, we really like that because we had a booming economy. You and I spoke just weeks ago, just record levels of unemployment, low unemployment, and rising wages. And if we can try to keep workers tied to their employer during this tough period we're in right now, it's going to enable the workers to get back to work more quickly. It's going to enable those businesses to get back up and running more quickly. So I do urge small business owners and employees of small businesses to look into these loans that are being made available by the Small Business Administration. It could help tide small companies over as we beat the virus and also provide income directly from the employer to the employee.
And Mr. Secretary, I run the Nixon Foundation. It's my second hat because I have like four full-time jobs. I just do that. Luckily, they're all still there. And I'm already got our payroll people putting in the application for 250% of January payroll. And that's great. We're not firing anybody. I want to, however, adopt the position of counsel for the people with two jobs. I'm going to press you on this, Mr. Secretary, because this is something you folks can do. You can tell the states you will make them whole if they make whole people who hold two full-time jobs. And I got to stress, so many millions of people, if you want to make sure that there's no substantial decrease in the quality of life and income in the marketplace, we've got to recognize a whole bunch of people work two jobs, and we got to make them whole.
Yeah, look, you're right. I mean, those are great Americans. That's part of what the country was built on. I'll take a closer look, and as I say, I think those rules could vary by state. But Hugh, let's remember this: the majority of people that are filing for unemployment right now probably are doing so because they're in states where there are stay-at-home orders. So even if they have two jobs, it may not be possible for them to get to either of those. And so it's not just often in these circumstances a loss of one job if somebody had to. It's just a really very challenging situation.
Oh, it's so hard. And so I just would, if they had two and they have none, I would give them two. Let me ask you about gig economy people. I used to take Ubers 3 times a day. I drive myself everywhere because I can't get sick. So if I have to go to a studio, I drive myself. The gig economy is crushed. What does the bill do for them? It
provides unemployment benefits for them too, and this is unprecedented. I mean, the bill really is a extraordinary attempt to cover so many different aspects of the problem we're dealing with right now. And as you know, Leader McConnell and the president were able to get this done, really very quickly on a bipartisan basis. So yes, for I think the first time the federal government is making the unemployment insurance benefits available for people who aren't in a direct employment relationship either. Gig workers can get that money applying through essentially the same process for those unemployment insurance payments. I also want to commend some of these gig companies that stepped forward and said, these, in their view, technically are not our employees, but we're also going to make paid sick leave available to them. That was done by, I think, a couple of the major gig companies. Uber did it. And that was a nice thing to see, and it was just one instance of the way companies are stepping forward now to help us during this challenging time. We look to the government in crises like this, but we ought to remember, too, that just great strength and resources that our private sector gives us, and it's an advantage we have over every other nation in the country, and it's nice to see them stepping forward, too.
Let me ask you about commission-driven workforce. Realtors, haberdashers. I think of the guy who sold me suits for 30 years. I go in once every 2 years because I hate to buy clothes. I don't know if you're a clothes hound or not, Gene Scalia. I doubt it. But there are a bunch of people whose commissions might have gone from a very robust to a very anemic level of income. How do we help them?
Well, I think there are a couple different ways that there might be relief for the people you're mentioning. Some will be, independent contractors, like the gig workers you were talking about, who might be able to get unemployment insurance by that mechanism. Others will be essentially small business operators. That's another way of looking at it. And the small business loans that I mentioned to you, which tied people over, small businesses, and they're forgivable if they keep their payroll intact. Those loans may also be available to sole entrepreneurs or all other small business people.
Hey, quick question, since I got the Secretary of Labor. How long do I have to keep my payroll intact to have it forgiven?
I don't have the exact number. I think it's for a period of a couple of months. It might be an 8-week period that we're looking for people to do that in order to have that loan fully forgiven.
All right, you're a wizard. Just please keep deregulating and pushing out help. I mean, the more money we flood the system with, right, the better off the recovery will be.
It's just, Hugh, those were words I never thought I'd hear you say.
Yeah, you bet.
But look, you're right. This is an extraordinary time, and we need to. We're asking for great sacrifices from American men and women, and we need to try to make them whole and sustain them during that period. And of course, as they get money in their pocket, it puts us in a better position to start this economy back up again. We had such a strong economy under the president's leadership just a month ago.
Mr. Secretary, the president is considering the moral equivalent of war bonds. I know that. Victory bonds in World War II, Liberty bonds in World War I. I think the American public in small denominations would flood in. Those of us who have jobs and are thankful for it would buy these bonds to assist in the recovery and the payment for this. Have you had a chance to discuss that with him yet?
I'll leave that decision to the president and the Treasury Secretary and others who want to look at different financing mechanisms. I will say that the analogy to the kinds of things that we do in wartime is appropriate. I think you sort of cycle back to American history. You probably have to go back to World War II to find a time where there were such sacrifices being asked for from the American people and such a challenge to the country. And so I certainly understand how that is a topic under consideration.
Well, I hope you give them some thought. And I also hope that you greet Father Paul on behalf of everyone listening and everybody else who's in the ministry. On behalf of Eugene Scalia and I, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Take care.
I want to remind everyone, relieffactor.com is out there for those of you who are spending some of your time with excess time working out. I think you should be wearing a mask. I've been debating whether I run in a place where there is nobody. Or very few people, and I can give them wide berths. I don't think I have to put a mask on. But I do think relieffactor.com means walkers, runners. You're all new to this. If you're new to this, you're going to have new muscle groups, new feelings you never had before. Dwayne is an alien to exercise, actually. It's going to be interesting for Dwayne. Relieffactor.com. Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, omega. 4 natural supplements. I take them every day. Support for the temporary relief of the minor aches and pains that come with aging, and you're doing that. Whether there's a virus or not in the world, you're going to get older every day. And if you're exercising more, relieffactor.com comes your help. Also remember, honorboundcoffee.com. Every cup of coffee you drink when you use honorboundcoffee.com benefits the troops. Please go and subscribe. Welcome back, America. You just heard Secretary Scalia say 6.6 million Americans unemployed this week. We will continue. The markets are pretty resilient given that. They expected it. I'm joined now by Josh Rogin of the Washington Post. If you're not following Josh on Twitter, at Josh Rogin, you definitely should be. 2 columns this week, one on the National Security Council and the virus, one on the propaganda war with China. Josh Rogin, welcome. Tell us about the first one first. What was your finding when you looked at how the NSC has been operating?
Great to be with you, Hugh. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Thanks for having me on. Earlier this week, I wrote about the National Security Council under Robert O'Brien and Matthew Pottinger. All the articles that you had seen was about whether the pandemic office was at this part of the org chart or that part of the org chart, and everyone basically saw the NSC's role as that and that only, and I took a little bit of a closer look, and I found something very interesting. As it turns out, they're doing a lot of different stuff, and this is a reflection of the fact that coronavirus is not just a public health crisis, it's also a national security crisis, and it's also a huge event in the U.S.-China relationship, and we just happen to have a deputy national security advisor who speaks fluent Mandarin, who is actually a reporter for the Wall Street Journal in Hong Kong and China. During the SARS epidemic, he understands the Chinese Communist Party, and he understands that when they have one of these things, they do a terrible job and they lie about it and they don't tell us the truth. And so he tried to raise all of these alarms. And, as we know now, nobody really listened for a variety of complicated reasons. But the point is that, when you have an emerging sort of international problem coming out of the People's Republic of China, maybe you should listen to the China experts. And what they were saying is that this is worse than we think. We need to prepare. The Chinese government is lying about the numbers. They're lying about their response. They're killing dissidents. They're jailing journalists. They're jailing whistleblowers. Of course, all of that later turned out to be true. And if you open up the Wall Street Journal today, that's exactly what you'll see, is that this has all been verified. The point here was that our National Security Council was about 2 months ahead of a lot of the other parts of the government, and maybe next time we should think about that when one of these things from China comes about. And it's
now implied in your column, Josh Rogin complimenting Ambassador O'Brien and his deputy Matt Pottinger, is that Mick Mulvaney was an obstacle to the alarm. Is that what you meant to imply?
Yeah, no, not imply. I'm just stating that as my reporting straight out. And I don't think you really have to be the amazing Kreskin to know that Mick Mulvaney was downplaying the virus. He said so publicly at CPAC in late February. What I'm adding to that is that a month prior to that, when people inside the administration went to him, he was then the acting White House chief of staff. Everybody knew he was on his way out, but he wasn't quite out. And they said, hey, listen, this is something that's going to require a lot of attention. He said, no, you national security people are getting too worked up about this. And again, of course, that turned out to be wrong, and the national security people turned out to be right. But it wasn't just Ms. Mulvaney. My reporting also shows the Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, for a while at least, resisted some of the prophylactic and measures such as cruise ship bans and travel bans. And if he had reasonable reasons for having that position at the time, namely that he didn't want to upset the markets and hurt our American industries, and these are important considerations. But now that looks a little bit blinkered, especially as we see, the only real policy that President Trump can even try to brag about is the fact that he shut down travel from China and Europe as early as he did, and that surely saved us some time and saved us some lives.
Now, Josh Rogin, your column today is about, a ceasefire in the telling of truth by the United States and the pushing of propaganda by the Communist Chinese Party?
Right. Well, you may have noticed that President Trump's tone has changed on China following his March 27th phone call with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And, the cheap way to report that is to say, oh, well, Xi Jinping flattered him and he folded. But that's not really the truth, and it ignores a really important context here, which is that, there was a decision inside the administration to push back on Chinese Communist Party lies, Chinese Communist Party propaganda, with a campaign of real information to combat their disinformation. And we can say that it was necessary, but also costly because, it politicizes the issue and it causes blowback. It's like a political campaign going negative. It hurts the other person, but it hurts you as well. So after the phone call, there's a truce, but my column argues that truce is only temporary, and that if they want to stop lying about us for a little bit. We can stop telling the truth about them for a little bit. But in the end, Chinese Communist Party propaganda campaign during the coronavirus has been expansive and worldwide and coordinated and complex and very sophisticated and very confident. And this ushers in a new era where more than Russian propaganda, more stealthily than Russian interference, the Chinese government has built this propaganda machine that we're going to have to compete with, and not just us, but also us and our partners. And that's the new reality. So we can have a truce while we're waiting for their supplies to come to help save our citizens, and then after the coronavirus is over, we're going to have to turn back to this really a generational struggle over values and truth.
Well and truly put. Thank you, Josh Rogin. Follow him on Twitter at Josh, Josh, Rogin, Rogin, for the Steelers fans, at Josh Rogin. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Generalissimo. Thank every one of you for listening, whether you're the newest edition at 92 point, 90, oh, I got it wrong. The Tri-Cities area in Tennessee, 92.9. Or if you were a longtime listener back to KRLA days 20 years ago, we'll be here tomorrow with the next Hugh Hewitt Show.